So, we are in chapter 16. What are some comments you might make or observations you might make in regard to Samson in general? What kind of person, what are some things that you might throw out there that might describe Samson? What's that?
It was a gift from God.
He was.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was. Right. Yeah.
He didn't always do what he was supposed to do, but in the end, he came out all right.
Well,
He killed more Philistines than...
kinda. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
killed himself.
It was definitely a rough patch there for most of his life, but yeah.
I would say he was kind of on the selfish side.
Yeah, yeah.
Very
So-
confident.
Very confident, okay.
Multi-confident.
Okay, so hold on to that word, Robin. So Debbie, when you say selfish, what are some of the evidences in the scripture for that? No, you're okay. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Well, yeah, I did. I did mean to put you on the spot. But not in a bad way. I was just thinking what kind of rises in your mind as you think about Samson and his selfishness and so forth.
His own eyes.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, the women that he went after.
Yeah.
That he put himself before his own family.
Okay, right. Yeah, because in particular, he saw the woman, the Philistine woman, and she was right in his eyes. Remember that, how it described it, how he said to his parents, you know what, get her for me because she's right in my eyes. You know, that's kind of disturbing because why was that an issue?
Well, she wasn't.
Right.
Same religion.
Well, it wasn't. It wasn't. No, you're right.
Jewish. She wasn't.
But it's almost like that word doesn't quite capture the fullness of it because it was that. The Philistines were not a covenant people. They were not in a relationship with God in the direct sense. I mean, they weren't interested in that.
They're also kind of like over the Jews, right?
At this point, they're oppressing the Jews. Yeah, you're right, Robin. So the biggest issue of all, whether they were oppressors, although that's a big thing, oppressors or not, though, was the fact that they did not know God. And therefore, they did not keep God's ways. You can't keep God's ways if you don't know God. Now, the thing about the Israelites is that they're not keeping God's ways either. And why is that? Because they don't know God either in the sense that they should. Now, they don't have the excuse that the Philistines have. Why do the Israelites not have the excuse that the Philistines had in not knowing God?
Because they've been taught.
They had been given the things of God. They were taught the things of God. They were given the covenant of God. And there's a when I say story, I mean there's a history behind them. There's a heritage on which they've built their people, their nation, as it were. And that heritage has to do with the fact that the God that had called them and had called them to know Him and to walk in His ways had preserved them, had protected them. Do you recall some of the ways that He's protected them in the past? Some of the big ways? What are some of the big things God's done in their past that they should be able to remember pretty quickly? Parting the Red Sea, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. The things before that, right? Well, and also when He brought them through the Red Sea, what did He do with the enemies who were trying to kill them? He destroyed them. They didn't fight that battle. God fought that battle for them. And God provided for them in the wilderness. What was it that He did for them in the wilderness? He gave them manna and quail and water in the desert. That's right. And so, even before the parting of the Red Sea, of course, they had all these testimonies to the power of God, and the fact that the power of God wasn't restricted to a province or to an area or to only a certain kind of element. He's not just the God of the dirt. He's not just the God of the sky. He's not just the God of the water. Not just the God of the fire. He's in command of everything, even life in death. Because what was the 10th plague for the Egyptians?
First child is
That's right. And the only way that the Israelites did not receive the same penalty in terms of, or judgment of God, was that they had to do what? They had to take a little lamb on which there was no spot or blemish, right? And they slaughtered it, they applied the blood over the lintels of the door. And so that the angel of the Lord passed over their homes. So Passover, I mean, of the big things that God did, the one that they especially remembered or should have remembered was the Passover, and which is still an important observance for the Israelites even today. Not that we always recall necessarily what that was all about, or even if you meet a typical Jew, you'll find different Jews who believe different things. Some who believe it's metaphorical, some who believe it's literal, but they're still Jews. But we read the Word, and we receive the Word as being very literal. So we believe that the Passover happened. We believe that God brought them through the Red Sea. We believe that He knocked down the walls of Jericho. We believe that He gave them the land before them. We believe that. We believe it to be true. We believe it, and we're thousands of years beyond this point. Samson, a very gifted person, has lost track of their history. And perhaps it's because he doesn't believe it. And because he doesn't believe it, he doesn't believe only that God did those things, but he not only has lost track of that, but also of the meaning of those things, the significance of those things. And the significance of that, all of God doing all of those things, has to do with this, that God had established a very special and unique relationship with them. We call that a covenant, special promise, right? A very special promise that God holds himself to keep, even when the Israelites weren't so keen on keeping it on their end. So Samson loses track of the promises of God, becomes very selfish, very proud. You said confident. It's okay to be confident if we're confident in God. When our confidence is in us, then it's pride or arrogance, right? And that's dangerous. It's very dangerous. It's deadly to us, actually. Samson kind of strikes me as sort of like a... have you ever noticed over the years that on the Disney, I'm going to pick on Disney tonight, and I do it unapologetically. Have you noticed over the years how children who used to be stars in some of the Disney shows have very frequently become icons of depravity? I could list names. Becoming proponents of whatever pleasure you want to undertake. Their lifestyle is characterized by selfishness and indulgence, and they have everything that they want, and so forth. And their lives begin to break down. How often do we read of someone who was once a child in the Disney series has become an adult with an addiction issue? And that's not just Disney. There are a lot of stars who've gone down that same road. Why? Why is that? What is the connection? Is it partly that we have a person who's very gifted, given many different opportunities and blessings, becomes confused as to why those blessings have come to them, and begun to believe the lie that they deserve the good things, the extra special good things that they have, and that they're somehow superior to the regular schmoes who don't have those things? Is that possible? A gifted person begins to think I'm a superior person and you should give to me because I'm extra special. Have you ever encountered someone like that? Probably. Do they get on your nerves? Probably.
I would say they get on their own nerves.
I'd like to think so. Because I'd like to think that that might lead to some kind of repentance of some sort, hopefully, but I'm not sure that it always does. I've seen even pastors with that attitude. It's very dangerous. I think that Samson is an individual who's taken on those characteristics. He's a very special person, and not only does he have these, what do we know Samson for? His strength, his physical strength. No strength of character, ironically, but physical strength he has. And he probably knows the story of his parents having received the promise of his arrival. I must be a very special kid. And mom and dad, with good intentions maybe, I don't know, probably, good intention, probably indulging him. Why? Well, first of all, he's their miracle baby. It's easy to do that. And then secondly, well, not only did he come to them when they thought it was impossible to have a child, because he's the miracle baby in that sense, but he's also a miracle baby in the sense that an angel came and said, hey, you're going to have a baby. That's a pretty big miracle. Yeah. I don't know anybody who's had an angel come and tell them they're going to have a baby. Not personally. Only through the Bible do I know that. So Samson, having heard those stories, probably has developed this picture of himself. And because this is what he thinks he is, he acts in accordance with that. I'm a really special person. The world revolves around me. Therefore, give, do, yield, etc., etc. But in spite of all his character flaws, he's still a tool in the hand of God. You've got to keep that in mind, too. We're going to read in chapter 16. We already read about his marriage and how God used that to begin to deal with the problem of the Philistine oppression. Okay? So when we come to chapter 16, I invite you to read if you'd like. Verse 1 through 6.
Now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. When it was told to the Gezites, saying, Samson has come here, they surrendered the palace and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. And they kept silent all night, saying, let us wait till the morning light, then we will kill him. Now Samson lay until midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the city gate and the two posts, and pulled them up along with the bars. Then he put them on his shoulders and carried them up to the top of the mountain, which is opposite Hebron. After this it came about that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice him, and see where his great strength lies, and how we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him. Then we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength is, and how you may be bound to afflict it.
Okay. So how does it start? Samson goes up to Gaza. He meets a prostitute. He's with her, and while he's there, in what would normally be a very vulnerable situation, the Gazites, the people from Gaza, he's not an enemy. They're not Israelites, so they want to kill him, right? So they set an ambush, and it says that they're quiet all night. Apparently, they're whispering to one another, "Hey, let's wait. Shh, shh, shh." I don't know. Verse 2. But at midnight, verse 3, what's he do? He gets up, and what does he do? He doesn't just get up.
Goes out and tears the gates off the little gate post and carries along.
Bar and all. That's right. The two posts, and pulled them up, bar and all. And he put them on his shoulders, and he carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron, which would have been about 40 miles away. That's a long walk, even without a tremendous burden like that. But this is the first real picture we have of his strength. If we don't know how far that is, that may not be as clear to us. But he walked 40 miles with this stuff on his shoulder, on his shoulders.
The way it sounds, it was mostly uphill. He carried it to the top of the hill.
Right? Yeah, that's right. So this is how strong he is. He's really strong. It's supernaturally strong. Okay, so verse 6, it says that after that happened, it gives us this picture, it gives us this snapshot to give us an idea of just the physical prowess of Samson. So after this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Very famous situation here, Samson and Delilah. And apparently people were watching him, spying on him, and so forth. He's doing whatever he basically wants. But when they figure out he likes Delilah, okay, they do what? They go to her and they say, entice him, or in other words, seduce him, and see where his great strength lies, right? And by what means we may overpower him, and that we may bind him to humble him, and we'll give you money, 1,100 pieces of silver. And so Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies, and how you might be bound, and that one could subdue you. Now, there's a very fundamental misunderstanding of how this actually works for the Philistines. They're approaching it the way that probably most people would, and that is, what magical thing is happening that gives Samson his power? They associate it with some mystical ritual, some kind of token, something. What is it that we can do to overpower him? Okay? So they want to know what his weakness is. It isn't what they think it is. Even when Delilah explains the last thing, which we'll come to, it's still not what they really think it is. And if we don't unpack that carefully, it could be that we don't understand what it is either. Because the world, when it reads the story, tends to miss the point. All right, so verse 7, somebody would read 7 until 14.
Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh cords that have not been dried, then I will become weak and be like any other man. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh cords that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now she had men lying in wait in an inner room, and she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he snapped the cord with the string of toe snaps when it touches the fire, so his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have deceived me and told me lies. Now please tell me how you may be bound. And he said to her, if they bind me tightly with new ropes which have not been used, then I will become weak and be like any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. For the men were lying in wait in the inner room, but he snapped the ropes from his arms like a thread. Then Delilah said to Samson, up to now you have deceived me and told me lies. Tell me how you may be bound. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my hair with the web and fasten it with a pin, then I will become weak and be like any other man. So while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his hair and wove them into the web. And she fastened it with the pin and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep and pulled out the pin of the loom in the web.
Okay, so what seems to be happening here? Has he fallen in love with a good woman? No. Yeah. And his poor character qualities have really made him vulnerable to this, haven't they? So he's fallen in love with this woman who's being bribed. Now this is different than the woman that he married. Do you recall how it is that she betrayed Samson? She was threatened. We will burn down your house. We'll burn and basically kill you. We'll have you and your family in there, right? Okay. She was scared. Is Delilah being motivated by fear? But by greed, yeah. Greed. I like things. I like shiny things. I like money. Yeah, 1,100 pieces of silver. And so she asked him, hey, Samson, how is it that you're so strong? How could one bind you and subdue you? And he doesn't play right into it, does he? He gives her a false answer. Why do you suppose he does that? He does it 3 times. What are the 3 scenarios? The first time in verse 7, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings or cords that have not been dried, I will become weak. Okay, obviously that wasn't correct, because she tries it. And verse 11, if they bind me with new robes that have not been used, then I'll become weak like any other man. And she tries that, and it doesn't work. And verse 13, if you weave the 7 locks of my hair with the web and fasten it tight with the pin, then I'll become weak like any other man. She does that. And they come in, and what happens? It pulled away the pin, the loom, and the web. Okay. 3 times. 3 times. She says, Samson, honey, how is it that I'd really like to just know. I mean, I want to know all your secrets, and you say you love me and that kind of thing. Will you tell me how it is that how you could be subdued? And Samson, what does he do with that line of questioning?
He plays with her.
He plays with her. He plays with her. There's some kind of game being played, and do you suppose he trusts her?
That's not. Trust you too far, he's told her 3 different things.
Right, 3 different lies, yeah. Okay. Yeah, would you say they have a quality relationship? Yeah, it's not really a trusting one, is it? They can't really, neither one is being truthful with the other. But what kills me whenever I read this, of course, is it doesn't literally kill me, just so you know, but figuratively kills me, is when the fact that she asks these multiple times, and he tells her these different things, she tries those things, and does it again, does it again, does it again, until we come to verse 15. And she said to him, somebody read that if you would, down to verse 22, and we'll unpack this.
And she said to him, how can you say, I love you, when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have told me where your heart you, and have not told me where your great strength lies. And it came to pass, when she pestered him daily with her words, and pressed him, so that his soul was vexed to death, that he told her all his heart, and said to her, no razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up once more, for he has told me all his heart. So the lords of the Philistines came up to her, and brought the men money in their hand. Then she lulled him to sleep on her knees, and called for a man, and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. So he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as before at other times, and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. Then the Philistines told him, and put out his eyes, and brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with bronze ladders, and he became a grinder in the prison. However, the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaven.
Okay, so the 4th time it was different. Okay, what's different?
I told her the truth.
He told her the truth, right? Yeah. And how did it come to be that he told her the truth finally? You kind of said it earlier.
He gave in to her.
Yeah. He gave in to her. She pressed him and pressed him and pressed him and pressed him. And he basically didn't have any rest, so to speak. And yeah. His soul was vexed to death, right? In verse 16. So he told her all his heart. And notice how he answers, though. He not only says, a razor has never come upon my head, and if it does, then I'll be as weak as other men. What else is different about his answer than the previous answers?
That he'd been a Nazarite from the day of his birth.
Right, right. Why is that significant? Because it is. It's hugely significant. This is where the world just kind of misses the point.
Because he took the oath
He was,
to follow the natural. Yeah.
right, he was under a particular kind of dedication to the Lord, wasn't he? And that was the Nazarite call upon his life. When he invoked that particular quality of his life, and almost, if you will, it's in its own way. It was like a covenant too. Okay, if he held himself to the sanctity of the Nazarite vow, if he considered himself set apart for the Lord and so forth, then if he had done those things, the outcome would have been different. But he invoked that. He knew that he'd been set apart for the Lord, didn't he? That was the difference here between this answer and the other answers. The other answers had to do, if you do this, then I'll be weak. If you do that, I'll be weak. If you do this other thing, I'll be weak like other men. But this one, he actually acknowledges, and meaning that he knew he was set apart from God and was disregarding it. So his hair, there wasn't magic in his hair, but the hair was representative of his unique calling, wasn't it? That was the last thing that kind of visibly set him apart as someone chosen by God. And he foolishly tells her what that is because he doesn't have enough regard for the call that God has on his life to protect it. That's important for us because you and I have a calling from God. And what we need to do is to protect it and remember how precious and sacred it is, that call to walk with him in Jesus Christ. It's not a Nazarite vow, but it is a calling. So he tells her, and of course she's still conspiring. They come in, they shave his head, and in his pride, his arrogance, he just assumes that he's as strong as he ever was. I can't help but think he actually realized that his hair was already cut off when he woke up. Hey. But in his pride and arrogance, thinking that he's this special person that no one could ever touch, finds out differently.
Do you think he honestly believed it was his hair that gave him the strength?
He probably recalled the things that were said of him. And those things said of him, if you'll remember what was said to Manoah, his father and his mother, was what? You shall not let him drink wine or have strong drink. And the other big thing was, don't cut his hair. Right? And he evidently has never cut his hair. Okay. And so that's the one thing that marks his uniqueness. So I think that he knows there's a connection. But maybe he was so used to this idea that God was blessing him and that God would never let anything happen to him, that even so, he could go out and fight like all of them. It's unclear to me about that precisely, but he's very arrogant, so I think it's possible. Anyway, the ruse worked. They think he's defeated because his magic hair has been cut. But again, it's not really the fact of his magic hair, it's because that the Spirit of the Lord left him. You did catch that, right? Yeah, in verse 20. So they seize him in verse 21, they gouge out his eyes, and they bring him down to Gaza, and they bound him with bronze shackles, and he's made to grind mill in the prison. Okay. And then verse 22, but the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Why is that significant?
His faith is coming back.
Maybe.
Believe in God.
Maybe, yeah.
There was something to that.
Maybe.
I was thinking, if they're blind, then he's going around.
I think that okay, maybe so. I think one thing that I kind of think about when I read it is that God isn't done with him yet. Yeah, I mean, he goes through this humbling experience, right? I mean, he is humble. He's lost everything. He's now a prisoner, a slave. He's living the extreme version of what Israelites have been living whenever they've turned their back on God. So, in verse 23, would somebody like to read verses 23 to the end of the chapter?
The rulers of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate. They said, "Our God has handed Samson, our enemy, over to us." When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has handed our enemy over to us, the one who ruined our land and killed so many of us." When they really started celebrating, they said, "Call for Samson so he can entertain us." So they summoned Samson from the prison, and he entertained them. They made him stand between two pillars. Samson said to the young man who helped to stand, "Position me so I can touch the pillars that support the temple, and I can lean on them." Now the temple was filled with men and women, and all the rulers of the Philistines were there. There were 3,000 men and women on the roof watching Samson entertain. Samson called to the Lord, "O sovereign Lord, remember me, strengthen me just one more time, O God, so I can get swift revenge against the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars that supported the temple, and he leaned against them with his right hand on one and left hand on the other. Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." He pushed hard, and the temple collapsed on the rulers and all the people in it. He killed many more people in his death than he had killed during his life. His brothers and all his family went down and brought him back. They buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel for 20 years.
Okay. All right, so this is his death scene, right? I mean, some time has passed. His hair grows back. The Philistines have this humongous party, and they've gathered all kinds of people together in this one building, and they make him to entertain them, right? The symbol of the humiliation of Israel, the foe that they've conquered and defeated. They're going to rub his nose into every humiliation they possibly can. And so he comes out and he's entertaining them, and he tells, of course he can't see, so he has somebody who's showing him the way, right? And he says, "Hey, put me up here near the pillars." And he does. I'm sure he regrets it very shortly. How did he pray? Because he talks to God now.
He was humble.
He was definitely humbled. He wasn't the man he once was. What do you notice about his prayer?
God, he wrote with God.
Yeah?
I remember him. And he hadn't made much attention to him before that.
Okay, good.
He strengthened him.
Right? So he's acknowledging his need for God in this point. Would you say this is a virtuous prayer?
Strength comes from God.
Right? That his strength came from God, and that's important.
Yes, he did.
Now, would you say this is a virtuous prayer? How does he end that particular part of his prayer?
He just asked him to make it strong one last time.
Why?
So you had vengeance.
So he could have vengeance on the Philistines because of his eyes.
Can't say I blame him.
Well, I think his heart's still not quite where it ought to be. It's in a better place in that he recognizes, as was said, that his strength comes from God. But he's not thinking about his people. He's still being selfish. God uses them anyway. We keep saying that about Samson. God uses him anyway. God uses him anyway. God does indeed use him anyway. And there has been a shift in Samson. First of all, he actually is praying. That's the first time, I believe, that we've encountered Samson praying on any occasion for any reason at all. Even though he was a Nazarite. Secondly, he acknowledged that God was his source of strength. That took a lot of humbling for Samson. Because there seems to have been a general thought throughout his lifetime that this is just who he is. He's just great. He's a rock star. Nothing can touch him. He's a super athlete.
It's a superhero.
Yeah, yeah,
They watch all these things.
right.
It's like, all this is a superhero.
Yeah. I don't know if he's very heroic, though, even at the end, though. And it's interesting to me that how the scriptures describe it in spite of that. It says that he led them 20 years. Led them to what? Think of that.
To come back to God.
Well, I don't know if they do.
Well, but
We read, it seems like, and we'll read about this as we come to the next chapter. The next chapter doesn't necessarily follow exactly chronologically after this, but it's kind of happening about the time much of what's happened throughout the book of Judges. What's happening collectively for the people of Israel is that their hearts over time, even with Judges, have been getting farther and farther and farther from God. And so, because that's the case, their depravity, their wickedness, their sinfulness increases. So even their ruler is this pretty selfish, self-centered, arrogant dude that has to be humbled. So one thing I think of when I think about Samson, there are a lot of things we could take from Samson's life and think, man, I don't want to go down that path. And I think we could talk about all of those things all day long. How he's vulnerable to physical temptation, for example. The fact that he doesn't think rules apply to him because of his failure to regard the laws that God had for his people. Don't marry the Philistines. Don't do that. Don't do that. How vulnerable he is to a woman who's clearly trying to deceive him. What are you thinking, Samson?
Didn't have a handle on it. Well,
What's
he might have.
What's that?
He lied to her 3 times, so he must have.
He played that game. Somebody said played the game. Yeah, he played that game. And I think we play games when we're arrogant, and we play games with people, with their lives and so forth, thinking that somehow we'll always come out on top. It doesn't work with him, does it? So, as was read, he positions himself between the 2 pillars. He then continues his prayer in verse 28. O Lord God, please remember me, and please strengthen me this once. Of course, then he goes back to that I may be avenged on the Philistines, right? Okay, but what was good about the prayer?
He approached the Lord.
He's actually paying attention to God. Okay, what else?
Realized probably that was the only way that's going to get any help, don't you imagine?
I imagine, yeah.
I mean, being he's been there, I don't know how long, he was in there grinding, I think you're
Yeah.
already done, but maybe he had time to think about things.
What's he pray for? Remember me, right? That's the first thing. What's the second thing?
Strength.
Strength.
Give me strength.
Mm-hmm.
What about that?
One last time.
One last time. He doesn't pray to be saved from this predicament, does he? He prays.
His revenge.
He wants his revenge. Yeah. Okay. And so he grasped, in verse 29, he grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested. Clearly a design flaw, still. And he presses his weight against them, and he says in verse 30, let me die with the Philistines. And then he bowed with all his strength, and the house fell down upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it. How many people was that? 3,000. So, the dead there. Now, what do you suppose happened? Now, all of this to do something. What was God doing? Why did he do this? Why did he bring this about? In many ways, because we read what we read when Samson had that marriage and God allowed it because God was looking for an occasion against the Philistines. All of this is to say that God's been working, knowing Samson's disobedience, knowing that this was how it's going to happen. So God set this up so that thousands of Philistines are killed. Why?
Because it was depressing the Jews.
Yeah, this was God fighting a battle for them. And as a result, the oppressive hand, now the Philistines, they don't just magically go away, because we know that they stick around for a little while, right, into the kings of Israel. All right? But after this happens, the hand of the Philistines, as far as being the oppressive weight that it has been upon the people of Israel for the years that it's been there, they get relief. They get relief. Now, just to give you a heads up, chapter 17, the tone changes and the direction of the narrative changes a little bit. We're not going to go into that tonight. But we've read about all these judges, and so thinking back upon the different judges we've read about Samson, we've read about Jephthah, and who else? Remember any of them? Do what? He's a king later. Yeah. Gideon, right? Yeah. Okay. Ehud, the left-handed guy. Deborah and Barak. Okay. So, what would you say, what are some conclusions that you, as you read over the lives and the discourses of these different judges, what's a conclusion, what's an observation you make about judges and the people of Israel and so forth?
That God can use different people.
That's very good. You're right. God uses different people, uses them in different ways.
I mean, His
Yeah.
plan for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, most of the judges don't have supernatural strength like Samson does, but they have special callings, don't they? They have supernatural callings.
But everybody's had their own special
Right.
thing.
Everybody's story was different.
Yeah.
And all of that has happened. Remember when we began, the lament of the book of Judges was this, that the people did again what was evil in the sight of God. And we talked about why that was. They would do evil, and why did they do evil? Because they would stop abiding with Him. They would stop looking at Him. He ceased to be the object of their worship. They worshiped their own flesh, their own pleasures. They worshiped the ways of the Canaanites around them. They worshiped the gods that they worshiped, the quote gods, which aren't gods. They did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And all of that is a testimony to this, that when the people of God forsake their God, the heart of God is broken. And God, who is a jealous God, will fight for the love of His people. And so, in Judges, we're reading, and we don't just read it in the book of Judges, we'll read it when we read in 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles and the prophets and so forth. When the hearts of God's people are far from Him, God does not abandon them. He goes after them. He's a jealous God. That means He desires the affection of His people to the point that He will do what it takes to get their heart where it needs to be. Okay? So this church, God is jealous of our affection. God is jealous of our love. God is jealous of our worship. That means He's jealous of your worship, of your love, my worship. And God will bring into my life and into your life, into the life of this church, what it takes to keep God first place. And I think that's actually a great thing. That God is passionate for your heart. Do you have anything you want to say before we close tonight?
You back up a little farther to Solomon, even Solomon walked away from God.
It's true. His heart wasn't where it needed to be with God. That's right.
He's supposed to have been the smartest man on the earth.
Yeah. And the head goes where the heart goes. Your head will always rationalize what the heart wants. If you want something that God doesn't want for you, you'll come up with good reasons here to do it.
We're like kids used to say, well, everybody else is doing
Right, and that's,
I wanna be so.
and that's kind of what the
Yeah, that's kinda how they-
Israelites,
Yeah.
yeah. When we get to 1 Samuel, we'll look at that a little bit. I don't know when we're going to do that study, but yeah. They basically said to Samuel, hey, everybody else has a king, why don't we get a king, you know? Yeah, we want a king too. Yeah, everyone else is doing it, yeah. Well, let's close in prayer. If you'd like to close in prayer, somebody, I'll let you do that.
Father God, we thank you for this day, for this lesson, and that we must keep our eyes on what His will for us is. Not the way we think it should be, or the way we feel it should be, but God's will. We thank you for the many blessings that you give us today, for this good lesson tonight, and to meet with all these, with our fellow Christians, and to study your word, and find enjoyment and pleasure from it, and help us to learn new things. We ask, Lord, that you would bless this church, help it to grow and to be what you would have us to be in your eyes, not what we want it to be in our eyes. We ask, Lord, that you bless each one that's here as we go to our different homes, and help us to think over